do a quick introduction and leave over the MC to my colleague, Ms. Nashandi and Dr. Mgongo, who will switch in and continue from there. Allow me to take this opportunity to invite our I was echoing. I now take this opportunity to leave the floor to the opening remarks from our Head of Department for Computer Science Department, Prof. Zodi. He is going to give his welcome remarks, and I give the floor to him. Prof. Zodi, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Damundani. Today we don't have a microphone.
Yes, it has been taken for us.
Okay.
This one. Okay, let me switch on.
Let me try to do like Dr. Amungogo. Indaba. Indaba. Thank you very much. So I'm Prof. Zodi. I think the majority know me. I'm the head of the Department of Computer Science. So I'm going to give a short welcoming remark. So good morning to our key speaker, to our distinguished delegates, and ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure for me to welcome you to this second day of the 2022 Indaba X in Namibia. I would also like to warmly welcome the participants that are composed of the Acting Dean of Faculty of Computing and Informatics, the UNESCO representative, the distinguished scholar, the representative from the business sector. I think I only noticed one or two. And colleagues and students, thank you for being part of this Indaba X workshop. I would like to thank Prof. Rosa Maria Gil Iranzo and Professor Roberto Garcia Gonzalez from Universidad de Lleida for joining us to deliver the technical talk. I would also like to welcome Dr. Makamisa Senekene from Institute for Intelligent Systems at the University of Johannesburg. He's also going to deliver a technical talk. Also, warm welcome to Dr. Masele Atemkeng from University of Rhodes, who will deliver the keynote remarks on future of machine learning in Africa. So we welcome all of you. So Indaba X, as we all know, is a workshop aimed to promote knowledge and capacity in machine learning and artificial intelligence in individual countries across Africa. So the main question that most of us are asking is why artificial intelligence and machine learning? This is because AI and machine learning are growing very fast and finding a large number of applications in our society. Every time, for example, we search information on the internet, we make use of some machine learning algorithms. And yesterday, during our first day, we have seen an example of application of machine learning and artificial intelligence in agriculture. And there are many more examples of application of artificial intelligence and machine learning in our society. In finance, business operation, healthcare, network security, myself being an expert in network, I've made use of many machine learning techniques in trying to secure some network technology, mostly software-defined network. We do also apply some artificial intelligence and machine learning in online shopping and many other applications. So what are we pursuing in this workshop? In this workshop, we want to share information. And we want also to understand the practical challenges of using artificial intelligence and machine learning. That is why we have an hackathon. So with the hackathon, sorry. And with the hackathon, you'll be exposed to some machine learning tools and be able to apply them to build amazing things. So I truly believe that at the end of this 2022 Indaba X, we all going to help in advancing artificial intelligence and machine learning in Namibia. So before closing my speech, I want to welcome you once more and wish all the participants a future success and hope that many of you will choose a career in artificial intelligence and machine learning. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. Zodi, for the remarks. And I'm sure even our speakers feel welcome today. And before we actually go into the next talk, and I definitely agree that like Prof. Zodi said, machine learning is cross-cutting across the different sectors. And even if you are doing networking nowadays, networks have moved to software-defined networks. So you have to leverage on machine learning. So thank you. Another round of applause for Prof. Zodi. Okay, so our next talk will be by Professor Roberto Garcia Gonzalez and Professor Rosa Maria Gil Iranzo from the University de Lleida, which is in Catalonia, Spain, I presume. Can you hear us, Prof?
Yeah, I can hear you. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, good morning. Let me just see. Trying to get the speakers into the main system.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, so we can hear you and see you.
Hello.
Yes,
yeah,
we can hear you.
Me?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Okay. Thank you. Good morning. Okay, I will try now to share my screen. Okay, let me see. Okay. Let's see if I can share the presentation. Okay. I hope you can see now the presentation, the slides.
Yes, we can see the slides as well. Very clear.
Okay, so I will start already, if everything is okay. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this very nice event. Very happy to be here. Also, thank you to Emilia, who was the first to invite us and contacted us just to ask if we were able to participate. We are really happy to do so. We have prepared this presentation. Rosa and myself. Rosa is not able to join us today because she has another meeting. So I will do the presentation. Okay, let's see if I can go to the next. So this is basically our presentation condensated in this slide, because these are basically our web pages. And the interesting thing about this presentation, as you can see, there's some text here, but also a big graph with a lot of lines. Okay, this is because this website that we use as our personal home pages is based on the technologies that I'm going to explain today, that are knowledge graphs. These are basically two examples of knowledge graphs where different entities are highlighted. These entities represent ourselves, and also the rest. You can see that there are here like facets, more structured information. All this is rendered from this graph. Okay, so this is an example of how these technologies that I'm going to be presenting today, especially related to knowledge graphs, how we use them in real life, even in our home pages. Okay, and also you have here the links if you want to know more about the kind of research that we are doing, etc. Et so basically, the motivation of this talk, as you can see from the title, maybe too long, but the idea was that it was informative, is built on top of what is the main topic of Indaba, that is deep learning, identifying opportunities that we see in that specific domain, and we think that are useful for you to know about, because they are going to have big impact in the future of this discipline. We have seen, you already know that there is enormous impact of deep learning and artificial intelligence in different domains. But one of the main problems that is highlighted is that usually these systems, the models that are built, are called like black boxes, because they, from inputs, provide outputs, but they don't provide an easy way to interpret why that response is being provided, how they reach these kind of predictions that they make. And this is connected with what is called explainable AI, okay? That is making artificial intelligence capable of providing explanations about the predictions that are being made. And these are especially relevant when artificial intelligence, and especially deep learning, has a big impact on human life, the decisions, the systems that we are using. And in these cases, it might be also, in some cases, the regulations are being built that these explanations may be even mandatory by law. This is, for instance, the case in the proposal at the European Union level of the Artificial Intelligence Act, okay, that classifies, as we were seeing before, these 4 levels of risk regarding artificial intelligence systems, okay, from minimal, that don't have any kind of restrictions because they don't pose any risk for citizens, like video games, spam filters, and so on, to systems that have limited risk, okay, like chatbots, emotion recognition systems. In these cases, the idea of these regulations that you have to inform users that an artificial intelligence systems is going to be interacting with them, so they can opt out if they don't want to be, in this case, interacting or being monitored by this kind of systems. Then we have systems that are the ones that we are going to take a special care, that are high risk, because the decisions that they might take can be potentially harmful or have a very big influence on personal interest of the users. Okay, in this case, like employment processes that are governed or driven or facilitated by artificial intelligence systems, also legal procedures where even it is decided if you remain on jail or not based on a decision of an artificial intelligence system. In all these cases, the regulation aim is that the system should be assessed before going into market, and also it should be then afterwards monitored, so you can audit the decisions that are made, so you can in some sense make the system accountable for the decisions that are made. And then there are others that directly go into an acceptable risk when there's a clear safety threat or some problems or imbalances for the rights of people, like facial recognition by governments, dark patterns, or other techniques that try to manipulate people. Like we can even see this kind of patterns in some games. So it will also try to make the game addictive and these kind of things. In all these cases, are directly unacceptable and are forbidden to be used, these kind of systems. Okay, so all these are putting a lot of stress on making these black boxes in order to make them accountable. They should provide some sort of explanation of the decisions that they make, so we can assess what they are doing and decide on the decisions that they are making. So they are no longer systems that just make the decision and it is accepted like that without any kind of consequence. So this is basically what is being in the horizon of artificial intelligence is being set of appears to be a new set of requirements that artificial intelligence system will need to have in order to be adopted, because in many parts of the world, regulations like the one I just presented are being drafted, and the idea is that they're going to be enforced at some point. So the idea is that artificial intelligence systems will need to be trustable, and among other things, like privacy, they are responsible for the decisions that they make. One driver of this is that they are explainable. So the decisions that they make are accompanied by an explanation, and we can inspect that explanation in order to decide the assessment of that artificial intelligence, they are accountable of that might emerge from that, and so on. And just putting some examples that make this very evident is maybe the more extreme case are autonomous weapons, okay, that are being used more and more, okay, machines that are capable of even make deadly force, kill someone, okay. These are increasingly prevalent in modern warfare. And despite there are a lot of ethical concerns, the problem is that how we can make assessments about the decisions that they make, how we can enforce someone to be accountable of the decisions that they make, in this case, very risk with a high risk decision, how we can do that, how we can even punish someone behind these systems based on the decisions that they have made. This may be one of the extreme cases, but we can see this kind of concerns in many other domains. For instance, one typical case that has been a lot in the press is the Compass system that is deciding, helping judges in the US about cases, if they allow them to go out of jail temporarily or not, helping in these decisions. The problem is these systems are trained with data with big bias, so they are incorporating that into the system, and this is completely hidden inside this black box, okay? So we need some way of making these systems, we can assess how they are making the decisions, so we can make some sort of, or implement some sort of mechanisms to remove this bias, training with different kind of data, incorporating mechanisms to reverse this bias. We need to know what is happening inside in order to solve these issues that in this case have really big implications for the persons behind and ethical issues also. Or another extreme case is what is called the game of life, okay, a system that is implemented in some parts of China that tries to enforce good behavior by citizens, but does that based on a lot of inputs, surveilling people, face recognition, systematized face recognition, recognizing the actions that these citizens are performing, punishing them, or providing prices based on if it's good or bad behavior. Okay, but despite the ethical implications of this, in any case, we need to know how these decisions are being made, because there might be mistakes, there might be many kinds of situations where we cannot allow this system just to govern the lives of millions of people without any kind of accountability. So these are just to highlight the importance of taking into account, when we design this kind of artificial intelligence systems, the ethical implications that they might have, and how we can solve or try to balance these situations by enforcing or making in some way that these black boxes are no longer these black boxes, and we can inspect why they are making these decisions. So in this regard, I wanted now to show you this overview of all these techniques that we have in artificial intelligence, especially highlighting the difference between symbolic systems, you know, the logic, okay, when you have inference, expert systems, all the systems that are based on the manipulation of symbols. That maybe is like the first generations of artificial intelligence in the 50s were based basically in this kind of technologies. Also, we have here in the middle techniques that are more oriented towards mathematics, statistical mechanisms, and also the subsymbolic systems that are based, or the most successful recently are artificial neurons. Okay, so all that is connected with deep learning, neural networks, and so on, that are a mix. In some cases, they also have some statistical mechanism in place, but are basically, most of them, subsymbolic. This is one of the reasons why these become black boxes, because they don't use symbols. So, for instance, they build like vectors in some mathematical space, multidimensional, like is typical in deep learning. And this behaves as a black box because we don't have a way to communicate this to people. It's easy when you have symbols, because these symbols, we can interpret them quite easily. But when these are like mathematical features, the way to communicate this to the users to know what is happening inside the system is much more complicated. And this is in this divide when where we see the opportunity for the future of artificial intelligence. The idea is that in this layer of the symbolic systems, we have especially one recent contribution that are the knowledge graphs, that are basically symbolic systems, because as you can see here, an example is all based on a set of symbols shaped into a graph that is based on nodes with symbols identifying them, relationships between these nodes that also have their labels and their meaning, their semantics. And the idea is that we use these knowledge graphs as a way to represent the knowledge in a particular domain. In this case, between animals, who eats who, and so on. Okay, this might be a very simple knowledge graph. These kind of systems are less flexible because they inherit a lot of the properties of the symbolic systems. They are less flexible, less robust to noise compared to deep learning models. But on the contrary, what they have is that they are natively developed to be explainable because they are based on symbols defined by people. So it's easy. These knowledge graphs are in fact intended for both computers and people to be understood. So the idea is to build on top of these knowledge graphs that have these structures, also are based on what are called ontologies that capture, formalize how a domain works. The idea is to build on top of this by combining what are called hybrid artificial intelligence, combining symbolic and sub-symbolic systems. Okay, the idea is that we can use knowledge graphs that, as we have seen, are rooted on symbols and are easy to explain. Use these knowledge graphs in the context of deep learning. So when we make a decision based on these systems, based on deep learning, we can go back to these symbols and more easily explain why the decision has been made. Okay, and the kind of approach that we are going to be focusing on this presentation are what are called embedded representations. The idea is that we can get this knowledge graph and make a representation that is suitable for deep learning based on a set of embeddings. Okay, and then use these embeddings to drive a neural network that is capable of making decisions based on that. So before going deeper into that idea, I would like first to, because maybe it's a topic that you are less familiar with, explain better what is a knowledge graph, how to build one of these knowledge graphs. And the idea is quite simple. The idea in a knowledge graph is basically that you have statements, things that you say about the world, that are based on what are called triplets, with a subject, a predicate, an object. Okay, so you are talking about, for instance, a subject that is Bob. You are saying that this person is interested in the Mona Lisa, the painting. You can say many things about the same subject. You can say also things about the objects that now become the subject, and you can also say things about the Mona Lisa, for instance, in this case. The idea is that if you accumulate all these statements, they build up like a big graph of relationships between these entities that are represented by the nodes, and this is called a knowledge graph. There are already many existing knowledge graphs, some of them quite big. For instance, maybe the one that you might be more familiar with is Wikipedia. Okay, this is basically not a knowledge graph, but from Wikipedia we can derive more structured representations that can be represented using graphs. And we have, for instance, what is called DBpedia. DBpedia is a knowledge graph based on the Wikipedia. We also have the Wikidata, that is a similar initiative to Wikipedia, but directly modeling data instead of documents, like is the case of Wikipedia. And here we have an enormous quantity of knowledge that is accumulated. Some of it is generated manually, other parts are automatically mined from all these sources of information. We also have Google has their own knowledge graph. Facebook also. Okay, all these companies are using these kind of representations when they want to deal with highly connected information. And the idea is that we can also build our knowledge graph for specific domains. And I will put here, because I think it's quite easy to understand by following this example, one case that I use in the classroom as a classroom project. The idea is to show the students a way of a particular case where we are modeling a knowledge graph, so they can then build their own as a part of the classroom project. Okay, In this case, it's an example of how to use knowledge about the Game of Thrones books. Imagine that you are someone that are going to be, you have seen the TV series and now you want to read the books, okay? And you want some sort of help because it's a very complicated topic with a lot of different people, different affiliations and so on, the houses that they belong to. So you want to have some support that helps you not getting lost when you are reading the books, and also connect with what you have seen in the TV. Okay, so the idea is that how we can use existing knowledge, so we don't need to reinvent everything and write everything down again. So we can reuse existing information, integrate also all this information into just one source of that will be a knowledge graph, and use that to drive systems that help us better understand this world. In our case, in this case is an example of building everything ourselves. We can start from existing sources of information. There's in Kaggle one data set about Game of Thrones. The idea of this data set is, for instance, train systems to help you make predictions about when one of these characters is going to die and make this kind of predictions. But as you can see, this is a tabular kind of data, a CSV. And the biggest issue of these kind of representations is that they are flat and they lack meaning, semantics formalized in the representation itself. So for instance, here, there are some columns that are easy to interpret, the gender or the book chapter where the character is introduced. But there are others that, if you don't know a lot about the topic, are more difficult to understand, like GOT, COK, and 1 or 0. Okay, what does it mean? Okay. From the explanation, we see that 1 means true, 0 means false, okay? But we don't know what is the meaning of these columns. We have to inspect the description of the data set, and then we see that this represents the first book, Game of Thrones, different books, and if the character appears or not in that book, okay? So this needs a lot of effort from someone that is trying to understand the data first, and also it's difficult to automate the understanding of this data. Here is where knowledge graphs can help, because we can represent this information. If we pick one of these rows for one of the characters, we can represent all this information, like starting now in the form of a graph, because we have an entity and all the properties. This is the meaning that we can get from this table after interpreting that. But as I was saying, this appears in book 1, appears in book 2, has lacks all any kind of context that helps you understand better. So what we can do with a knowledge graph is add this context. Okay, to do that, what we usually do is, instead of inventing a new vocabulary to say how we are going to represent the name of a person, how are we going to represent the picture that we can use to depict that, in this case, a character, okay, in the series. What we usually do is to reuse existing vocabularies. The idea is that if everyone reuses the same vocabulary, when we share data among us, it's going to be easier to integrate the data, understand the data, know about the meaning. And we have even a website when we have hundreds of vocabularies that we can reuse. For instance, in this case, we are reusing one vocabulary that is FOF, that is friend of a friend. It's a vocabulary that helps us model social networks. So the connections between people, the names, the depictions, all this information. We are going to be reusing properties that are defined in this vocabulary. Okay. The idea from FOF is that you can represent in a more interoperable way your social network, so you can move from your contacts from one social network to another. This will be the final aim of this kind of representation. But also we are using, for instance, DBpedia to represent, we have persons, we have books. We are capturing the knowledge that we have in the domain. So the idea is that we can better capture the context about the data, so we can use this later to help the machine understand our data. And based on this, what we can start doing is to rewrite this graph that we are generating from this tabular data. So using properties that are well-defined and appear in existing vocabularies. Also, instead of using appears in book 1 or appears in book 2, what we do is reuse from these existing knowledge graphs, like the DBpedia one. There it is defined, the book Game of Thrones, Clash of Kings. All these entities are already in that knowledge graph, so we reuse that. And in fact, what we are doing is connecting that amount of information, so we can get from there all the contextual information about who is the writer, the author of that book, when it was written, when it was published. All this information, we can gather it from there just by reusing the ID from that knowledge graph. And we can further enrich. Okay, here we have 1 if it's a novel, the gender is 1 and 0, but we don't know which one each number represents. So let's use symbols, more explicit information to represent all this information. So we say that this belongs to the class of novels, that the gender is male, okay, and so on and so on. We continue enriching the information that we have. We can even go to DBpedia. I was mentioning this knowledge graph that is derived from Wikipedia. And there we have already information captured about the different characters, the main ones especially, from Game of Thrones. We can search for them using a special query language for knowledge graph that is called Sparkle. We can retrieve the information, and based on these queries, here you just have one example. You can try that later. The idea is that you can get that information from this knowledge graph and inject it into your own. So in just one query, you can do the whole process of extracting, transforming, loading the data. And the idea is that you can add all this information to your existing knowledge graph. As you can see, what we are doing is providing more context to the data. Okay, this is the benefit of this kind of structures of knowledge graphs, that we can contextualize the information. So in addition to being easier for people to understand this kind of information about these characters in Game of Thrones, it also provides a lot of contextual information for machines also to use and enrich their decisions. Here you have some examples of what is the procedure if you want to automate this process. Is basically taking the table that we have seen at the beginning, identify which of the columns is the ID, and this will be the subject of all the triples. The column name corresponds to the properties. We have a property that was, for instance, the gender, another one was if it's novel or not. We use that as the predicates. And the values, the cells for that row will be the objects of the triples. And just by automatizing this process, we can generate the knowledge graph based on that table. Okay, here you have just one example of how that will look in the notation that is used to represent knowledge graphs. And also very convenient is that we have tools that help us do that in a more systematized way. That is, for instance, OpenRefine is a tool that you can load any kind of tabular data, and you define the template to generate the knowledge graph, and automatically does that for us. Okay, I will not get into too much detail, but the idea is that you have all these pointers, so you can later, if you are interested, get deeper into that. We can even get additional sources of information. In this case, for instance, we need the pictures because we want to help people connect the characters in the TV series with the characters in the books. So it's useful to have the picture and have the picture of the actual person that interpreted that character in the series. So the idea here is that we are just scrapping the HBO website and getting the pictures. And the good thing about knowledge graph is that if we use the ID, the same ID for when we convert the table into the knowledge graph, and also when we extract the information from the web page, the data is automatically integrated because it's connected at the level of the graph. And the final result, here you have an example of the full process, is that, for instance, we can use tools like the one that I showed also that we use for our personal web pages. This tool is called Rhizomer. It's a tool that is capable of getting this knowledge graph and generate automatically visualization of the information because it's using all the time the same structure. The properties are well defined, so it can automatically generate a visualization for the knowledge graph. This will be an example of the benefits of knowledge graphs, even from the point of view of interaction with the data and visualization. But this is basically all the time working at the symbolic level. Okay, so working with inference, with rules, and so on. And our objective is to mix knowledge graphs with deep learning so we can have these hybrid systems that combine or try to get the better from both worlds. What can we do in order to do that? Okay. Here, the idea is to adapt ideas that are used in natural language processing, like word-to-vec. The idea is that we can generate vectors. Okay, any issue with the presentation? Everything okay? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Any issue or it's?
No, there are no issues. There are no issues.
Okay.
Just
Okay. I can continue then. Okay.
yeah, just continue.
Sorry?
Just continue.
Okay,
we are fine.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so basically the idea is that to use the same approach that is used when we use deep learning to process natural language, and is to, for instance, perform in the description of a word in this kind of system like word-to-vec. Is the idea is that you model how a word is connected, appears in a set of documents near other words, and you build a vector representation of that. The idea is to use the same in the context of knowledge graphs. The idea is that you can identify entities that you are interested in your knowledge graph. For instance, here in the graphic is in the diagram is pictures. The idea is that you also build like sentences by performing walks around across the graph around that entity. And based on that, you build or try to build and train a neural network that represents these entities using multidimensional graphs, vectors, sorry. And the idea is that these vectors, the properties that you are expecting is that for semantically similar entities, they should appear closer in this vector space. Okay, so it's the same that is done with the deep learning systems used for natural language processing. The idea is the same, that for words, the words that are similar appear near in this vector space. And as you can see here, the films that are similar have similar relationships in the knowledge graph or connections with other entities in the graph appear also near in this vector space. And the idea is that then we can use this vector space for different kinds of tasks downstream in the deep learning process. Okay, here you have deeper explanation of how these knowledge graph embeddings are built. You have a full tutorial here that you can use to get deeper knowledge about how the training is made, how the walks or different approaches to make these walks across the graph to make it more semantically representative of the data and so on. And the final idea is that we can use these kind of representations then to drive, for instance, classifiers that help us decide if a film is going to be good or bad. And in this case, it's not just based on some tabular information that we have provided to the system, but as we will see, it's based on a lot of context information that we have accumulated from the knowledge graph. So at this point, what we have is a system that is capable of providing these decisions based on the information on the knowledge graph, but we also need the explanations, that is all that is motivating us. So we need to know why this decision is being made based on the model. Here, the good thing is that there are existing initiatives that help us for existing models that we might have built, make them explainable. And we are going to be focusing on LIME. LIME is a system, a tool that allows us to build explanations for decisions made by a model. And it can be used for different kinds of machine learning models. It can be used for machine learning models based on tabular data. The idea is that, for instance, if you have a data set about mushrooms, if they are poisonous or not, based on different properties, you have trained the model. The idea is that with LIME, you can build explanations for a specific decision. So you pick one of these mushrooms. The system, what it does is to make, we will see this with images maybe clearer, make perturbations, change things, and check how the predictions of the model change. And the idea is that with these changes and training a model to learn these different changes of the predictions, we can get an idea of which are the properties that are influencing more on the decision that has been made by the system. So we can explain for a particular mushroom which are the things that have made us decide that it's poisonous, and which are the things that maybe were supporting the contrary. Okay. The same can be done with text, and maybe the example that is easier to follow is with pictures. We can also use LIME to build explanations about a model that is trying to classify images, why it's making that decision. And basically what the system does is the same approach all the time. It breaks the picture into pieces, make them like blind, erases the information from that some parts of the image, and tries to make a prediction based on that. The idea is that if you repeat these for different configurations of the image, making blinds different parts of the image, you can at the end identify which are the parts of the image that are contributing more on the final decision of your model. And with this, you can, in this case, the decision is that this is a Labrador dog. Which are the parts of the image that are contributing more to that decision? So this is the way we can make explanations in this particular case. And finally, I wanted to show you the case of LIME applied to what we are seeing, this knowledge graph embeddings. We can use the same approach with knowledge graph embeddings. Here you have a project that is called RDF LIME. And the idea, the easiest way will be to switch here. I suppose you can still see. And you can see here that what they have done is to train, in this case, a system that classifies pictures, good or bad, based on knowledge graph embedding. So they have just explored DBpedia for each film, making a walk around the nodes, so to build this knowledge graph embedding. And then with Lime, what we do is to inspect, let me see if I can zoom out, inspect these different parts of the knowledge graph that are contributing to the decision about if it's good or if it's bad, the film, and make this perturbation. So we hide parts of this graph, we add others. So the idea is that we can identify which parts of the graph are contributing more or less to decide if it's good or if it's a bad film. And then build, in this case, is nice because they build this graphical representation. So you can see, for instance, here, The Godfather, the film, which are the parts of the knowledge graph embedding that we have built that are contributing more to saying that is good, that are just labeled in green, and which are the parts that are contributing negatively. Okay, in this case, the film is mostly good, so most of the arrows are green. And this is a way we can make an explanation for this decision of this model. Okay, in this case, based on knowledge graph embeddings. And the good thing is that because we are routing all this system on a knowledge graph that is based on symbols, that we have the symbols here in the explanation, so it's easier to interpret this explanation. Okay, this will be the whole feature in this case. And basically, what I wanted also to provide to you is this link I have prepared for you, so you can play with this system, a notebook that is available from Collab. Here you have the link. You have a GitHub repository where you have a link to this Collab notebook where you can play. You have all the imports that you need, Python packages that are used. You also have here an explanation of how we train this RDF to vector, the graph embedding, how we train them. It takes a lot of time. It's just commented here, so you can just download the embeddings already computed. They are all available also from the GitHub repository. Here we are just getting them, and we use these embeddings to train the system based on this Metacritic movies data set that classifies them as good or bad. The idea is that we can use that to train a classifier, and then we also install RDF Lime just to build the explanations for our model. So here you see how the explanations are built for a specific film. You are picking just film number 1, that is the Ratatouille film. Okay, it is predicted to be good, okay, and the true class is good. You will see that the performance of the classifier is really small because we have just used 400 films and there are more than 2,000 in the data set, but just to keep it fast. Okay, and here you can see how the perturbations are created to try to get which are the parts that are important to decide that the Ratatouille film is good. And here you have the representations of that decision, which are the triples in the knowledge graph that are contributed, that have contributed positively to supporting that is a good film, which ones are contributing negatively. You have this representation as a table, but you also have the one that you have seen as a graph. So you can play with this system, train it with different kinds of entities, or play with other films, just to get an idea of how this whole system works. Okay. And just finishing, so I can leave some time for questions. Just wanted to show you here the main takeaways of this presentation, or at least what we want to communicate with it. Is first, the importance of building artificial intelligence systems that can be trusted, especially based on where they are going to be applied at the end, the ethical implications that they might have. So the importance of making them more transparent, so there are no longer black boxes, and a way that they can be made accountable of the decisions that they make. They cannot hide behind, okay, this is a completely black box, so I don't have any way of making you accountable because I cannot get onto what the decision has been made. Also, the importance of this, especially in connection with the learning techniques, because maybe are the ones that are more black boxes at the end. The importance of explainable AI. How we can use knowledge graphs that are natively prepared for explainability because they are based on symbolic systems to help us in this particular case. The opportunity that is starting to be evident in the community, that we need to start building on these hybrid systems that combine symbolic and subsymbolic, because maybe we have gone too far using just subsymbolic and too much into the black box kind of artificial intelligence. How we can make this combination, for instance, based on knowledge graph embeddings is one of the techniques. We also have, for instance, knowledge graph neural networks. There are other approaches, but maybe the easiest one is knowledge graph embeddings. Benefits of these techniques, we have seen that we can more easily reuse existing knowledge, so we can better contextualize our data. This, in principle, should make the system more performant, so we can contextualize the decisions made by the deep learning system. And also through this contextualization, we can make the explanations that we can build on top of the decisions that are made by the system easier to interpret, because we can connect them with symbols, relationships, and so on, and go back to this knowledge graph in order to get why the decision is made. And as a final takeaway, in general, for you in the hackathon, or when you are developing your projects based on artificial intelligence models, just that recommendation, just try to experiment with these explainable or explainability systems, adding value to your models, also preparing for the future, because this is going to be required at some point, especially depending on the domain of application of your projects. And for instance, try to explore the features that are provided by Lime, because it can help add explainability to your models despite the kind of data that you are using, tabular, images, knowledge graph embeddings, we have seen. In all these cases, you can use Lime just to add this added value to your model that it's capable of explaining the decisions that are being made. And that's all from my part. I hope that the presentation has been useful. And maybe if there are questions, we'll have some minutes. Well, not much. Sorry if I took too much time.
Wow. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I will share the presentation because I know there are a lot of links. I will share you. I will send the presentation so you can share with all the attendees. Happy to contribute, and for any question that they might appear, you can also contact us by email.
Okay. No, thank you very much. That was a very, very interesting and very insightful presentation. Some of us who are working on ethics in AI, it was good to hear some of the things that you said around Lime. So can you hear us?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Very happy.
Yeah, no, I'm very, very happy. Please share your presentation. And is there any burning question in the room? I have a couple of burning questions.
Okay, thank you.
So the first one, can we represent anything as a knowledge graph?
Yeah, that's the idea. Is representation so flexible that you can represent tables, You can represent trees, for instance, XML. We have also worked a lot of representing XML information. And the idea is that you have a model where you can combine information that comes from tables, from XML documents, from text. You can also extract entities and relationships from text. So the idea is that you have like a common language where you can integrate all this information together. That's the idea.
Okay, no, that's good. Yeah, because my background is medical images. I'm just imagining you have medical images, and the spatial nature of medical images is very, very important. How will you, for instance, represent some of those features without losing the spatial information in a knowledge graph, for example?
Yeah, the idea here is that you usually will have multimedia, combining different kinds of media. So you will keep the images too, but what you can do is to identify regions in the image, classifying that as of a specific kind of tissue of whatever. Also represent information about containment. This is for an organ. This organ is inside this other cavity. All this is added information that you will use to contextualize the picture. So you will add both mediums. And the idea is that then you can train systems on both information, the image, but also all this knowledge graph that helps you explain what is in the image, how the different parts relate between them, and even the kind of tissue, the organism, and so on and so on. This is the idea.
Okay, no, that's good. Thank you so much. Okay, there's one question here. I think you might have to come here because we do not have the mic today. Yeah, one last question. Then we move on to our next presentation. Hopefully.
For your great presentation. I somewhat got confused a bit. I don't have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. Now I saw the hand signs. Sorry. I just wanted a bit of elaboration on the well, the slide didn't have a number, or I couldn't read it from, but the picture of the dog.
Okay. Yeah. Here.
I just wanted to know more, and what mathematical aspects are you using there?
Okay, here you even have a collab notebook where you can just play with this system. Is really well explained there, and you can actually play with it. Basically, what is being done here is you have trained a system to classify pictures, kinds of dogs. The idea with Lime is that you are training like an additional system that is just for one example, so one picture in your data set, because what you want to identify is which part of the image is contributing more to the decision made by your model that this is a Labrador kind of dog, okay? So the idea is that what you train the system with is with the picture, but hiding parts of it. So you divide it into pieces, hide some parts of it, and train the system just to check if it reaches the same decision. So the idea is that this way you can identify which are the parts of the image that are contributing more or are approximating better your model, because they are providing the same decision for the same picture. And this will help you identify which are the parts of the picture that are in fact contributing to making the final decision. Okay, it's like approximating why this was made, which are the parts that provide more information to support that decision. And you do that case by case. So it's an explanation for just one picture, not for the whole model. I don't know if it's better explained now. And in any case, I just encourage you to check these links. I will share the presentation. So you can play with different pictures, see how the decisions are made, because Lime is a very sophisticated system. And the idea is that you can just use it in your particular projects.
No, thank you very much, Roberto. Another round of applause for you, please.
Okay, thank you very much. A pleasure.
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Can you share, may you please share the slides from that side, because I'm trying to share from my app, so it's not sharing the screen.
Okay, let me see. Are you able to share now? Right?
Because I'm close now. Let me check. No.
Yeah, you see, you started sharing.
Can you see my slides?
Yeah, you have started sharing, so we're still waiting for them to appear on this side.
Okay, let me see.
Okay, you are sharing.
But it's a whiteboard.
Yeah, so basically you're just seeing a black screen this side.
Okay. May you please share them from that other side, and then I'll go slide by slide if it's okay with you.
Oh, yeah, but I will, okay, let me see if I can send them, because this laptop was not connected. So let me see if I can get them.
In the meantime, I'll just try to connect from my side.
Okay. Okay, Mahamisa, can you hear us?
Yes, yes, I can hear you.
Can we try again to see if you can share, because we trying to get it on the flash drivers here as well.
Okay. Let me try.
Check if you got it.
On Gmail. Is it still coming? Is it the share that doesn't appear?
Yeah, I think it's okay, now we can see your screen.
But no
But we
presentation.
can only, yeah, we can't see
Sorry?
your presentation slide. We can see you.
Let me see.
You did it?
No, this is for you.
Oh, thank you.
What is that?
And this is,
Oh, this is. Are you busy sharing, Makamisa?
Yes, but I'm trying to escape from this to stop sharing my picture, my video. Let me see if I can-
Try to stop the video, maybe.
is there another USB on this side?
Disable the.
Is there another USB that's on?
Yeah. Oh, it has double. Oh, that's nice.
That's actually
Nice. Oh. How do I escape? No, I don't want to end. How do I maximize? In Mac, we are used to escaping. Maybe that will end everything. Option is on the side. Review option. It's on the side. Where is it even?
down here.
Oh,
Wait,
halfing.
no. Then take some. Don't view them on the browser. Close. And just view them. Bandwidth. Yeah. Okay, I think in
Is it view?
yeah. But that one you do it already
Right
later. When you're
Try to
sharing.
share.
Mahamisa, can we share it on your behalf? Or did you
Yes,
manage?
please. Yes, you can check it on my behalf.
Okay. Can you see the screen?
Yes, thank you very much. Yes. Unfortunately, there'll be a bit of logistical nightmare because I'll just have to notify you every time I move to the next slide. If that would be okay with you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe let me know when
You can start.
Okay, thank you. Once again, I'd like to thank Lamek and the organizing team for inviting me for this event. And I apologize for this inconvenience. I'm not sure why I couldn't share stuff on my Zoom. I'll have to troubleshoot that later. So my name is Makamisa Senekane. I'm currently working as a senior researcher at the Institute for Intelligent Systems here at the University of Johannesburg. So my talk today will be a bit of introduction to privacy-preserving machine learning, focusing mainly on one of the PET or privacy-enhancing technology called differential privacy. So I'll go through maybe privacy preservation, a bit of ML, because I think the audience is quite familiar with machine learning, and then later I'll talk on work on differential privacy. So as we can see, this is the outline, a bit of an introduction, what are the objectives. Also, I'll cover PPML or privacy preserving machine learning, where the idea is actually to try to come up with trustworthy machine learning. It's another instance of trustworthy machine learning, where we are saying we want to ensure that the privacy of the individuals who provide that data for analysis of machine learning, that their privacy is actually preserved. So there are different technologies that can be used for that. One of which is differential privacy. So I'll spend some time discussing differential privacy and how it can be used for application machine learning. Then a bit of summary, like to provide an overview of what is covered. Next slide, please. Next slide. So as an introduction, with the motivation is, what we know is that we are collecting more and more data for data science, but at times we might collect data which is sensitive, like in medical applications or in finance, when we're dealing with issues of fraud detection and everything. We might be collecting data which is sensitive, that needs to be protected. So in that case, that's why we need privacy preserving tools to assist us when we implement our machine learning algorithms. So next slide, please. Basically, that's the outline of my talk today. Yes, next slide. Next. So in this talk, I'll cover PPML. I think previous slide. It's moving a bit fast. I'm sorry for this inconvenience. Once again, I'd like to apologize. Previous one. Oh. Previous slide.
Oh.
On the objectives. Yes, this one. Thank you. So I'll just cover a bit of machine learning. It will be just a brief introduction because I think it has been covered a lot. And then my focus will be on data privacy and how we can use privacy tools and combine them with machine learning for privacy preserving machine learning. So I'll also provide a brief overview of some of the PETs or privacy enhancing technologies that are used to enable privacy preserving machine learning. Next slide, please. Okay, next. This is just the section. So what do you mean by this PPML or privacy preserving machine learning? We just mean that it's a fusion or a combination of both data privacy and machine learning. So it combines these two fields of study, data privacy and then machine learning. Next slide, please. So with machine learning, like I said, I won't go further into details because I think because it's Indaba, deep learning Indaba, it's possible that other people will go into detail about ML, but I just want to make some few slides just to provide an overview for what ML is. So the idea of machine learning is to enable computers to learn from data without actually being explicitly programmed, without actually coming up with all those cases like if this is done, do this, if this is done, do that. So we just want machines to learn from data. It's a subfield of artificial intelligence. Next slide, please. Yes, it's a subfield of AI or artificial intelligence, which is actually concerned with extracting meaningful insight from our data. So we supply the machine with data, and then from that data, the machine or the computer or the software agent should be able to extract meaning or extract insight from data. Next slide, please. So there are different applications of machine learning. They include customer churning, where we can use it for applications to predict whether the customer will stay within the company or leave the company. It can also be used for anomaly detection, to detect anomaly in our data, like in fraud detection. You can also use that for recommender system to recommend products based on what the feedback from other users. We will also use it for game design. It's also gain interaction in drug discovery, where we're trying to investigate molecules that can be used for drug design. And one application is the use of machine learning in time series forecasting, with one application being in weather forecasting, including what we call weather nowcasting, where we're trying to forecast a short time forecasting of weather. Next slide, please. So depending on one's view, machine learning can be categorized into different categories. Some will say it's just 2 categories, others will say it's 3. But for the purposes of this talk, I'll just say there are 4 categories, because they can be, each category can be like defined separately. So I don't think there's a need to combine most of them. So the first one is what we call supervised learning, which is what we use for both classification and regression. We have both our input data and the data labels. We also have the semi-supervised learning, which is actually used even in applications like graph neural networks. The idea of semi-supervised is that part of the data is provided with both the input features and the labels, and the other part doesn't have the labels. And the idea is to use the one with the labels in order to predict the labels for the data without labels. And then we have supervised learning, where it's just data without labels. And the idea is actually to extract either insight in terms of clustering, for instance, or the generative models. And the last one is actually reinforcement learning, where we have a software agent that interacts with our environment. And the idea is to maximize the cumulative reward at the end of the day. Next slide, please. So having talked about ML, and having said earlier that PPML is the fusion of data privacy and ML, now I'll focus more on data privacy. So what the data privacy does, or the whole objective, is to ensure that with the sensitive data, the privacy of individuals is still maintained. That means it's not compromised. For instance, if you are going to collect a large data set for our machine learning application, we have to ensure that the risks for the leakage of our data are minimized. So that idea of minimizing risk is data privacy. So with applications of both data science and machine learning, we are seeing that increased need for ensuring that there's data privacy in our designs of machine learning systems or data science systems. Next slide, please. So there are different privacy enhancing techniques or data privacy approaches that are currently in use. The most basic one is how do you call data anonymization, where we're just interested in just removing, how do you call PIIs, or private personal information for individuals. Or we also have what you call federated learning. This one is more advanced. It's one of the recently established fields of study within privacy and enhancing technologies. So it's used in machine learning, where instead of using centralized data to train our models, we have decentralized systems within our system, our network. And the idea is just to use local data to train our models. So the central agent or the central server will just share the weights and biases, for instance, in the context of neural networks. And then the data will only be, the data that will be used will be localized within devices and it won't be shared. Meaning if it's a mobile device, the data will not leave the mobile device. So that way the privacy is guaranteed because data is not shared with any other individual. Another one which I'll talk about today is differential privacy. I'll just go through it, I think, in the next slide or two. And then there are other different PETs like homomorphic encryption, SMC or secure multi-party computation, or TEE. The rest I won't cover in detail. So my focus will be just on differential privacy. So the next slide, please. So this is an example of what we mean by data anonymization. We just remove these PIIs, like I said, personally identifiable information in our data set. So the data that we share for analysis or ML application is just data without all the PIIs. PIIs can be features like name. For instance, we can identify individuals by name or other personal attributes or features that can be used to identify individuals. So the idea is to take original data, de-identify it by removing PIIs, and then share it for use in data analysis or machine learning. Next slide, please. So there are different techniques that can be used for data anonymization. We have substitution, where we just substitute sensitive data. We can shuffle the entry points. We can use number variance, zero randomization, which is used in some applications whereby we just, for instance, a PII like name, we just provide a random ID for that name. So we just pseudonymize such PIIs or PII fields. And we also have key anonymity, which does to group different entries that have a certain K in the sensitive field or the sensitive PI that we're interested in. So both L diversity and titulessness are more like advanced instances of K anonymity. Next slide, please. Okay, now I think we'll cover differential privacy. So differential privacy, the whole idea is that it's one of the PETs. So its idea is to ensure that you can be able to collect and analyze data without compromising the privacy of the individuals. So it can be used for privacy preserving synthetic data sets, and it can also be used for data analytics. So for instance, we know systems like GANs can be used to generate synthetic data set, which can later be used for machine learning as an input data set. So we can also use differential privacy, where we take sensitive data set, we apply differential privacy, and then we generate synthetic data set. That's one of its application for generation of synthetic data sets, but it can also be used in machine learning. Like we have our data, and then from the data we apply machine learning, and then we have an output that we're interested in. For instance, if it's classification, we have a classification output. Next slide, please. So DP as it is, unlike, for instance, key anonymity or pseudo-anonymization, it is not an algorithm. It's not a mechanism. It's a definition of what the privacy means. To say if the privacy algorithm or the privacy mechanism meets or satisfies this definition, then we can say it's differentially private. So within that definition, we can have different mechanisms or algorithms that satisfy that definition. Sorry, next slide, please. So it ensures that only information that an individual could learn about the subject is essentially what the adversarial will still learn even without having access to the data set, meaning it tries as much as possible to minimize the leakage of data set from the original data set. So for instance, if an adversary had a certain background information, they could not learn a new or additional information by having access to a differentially private data set. So that way, if we could guarantee that privacy of individuals, then it's easier for people to participate in the study because they know that their privacy will be guaranteed. I think one of the huge applications of DP was in the census in the US. When they were collecting census data, they used differential privacy, and it was made possible because people were aware that their sensitive data, like their zip codes and everything, will not be compromised because the application of DP will guarantee their privacy. So that way, by using DP, we can incentivize participation in the data set, so making it possible to collect more and more data sets, and that can be used for machine learning. So the next slide, please. So what I said earlier was that we want to ensure as much as possible that the information is not leaked. But what it does basically is to bound the amount of information leaked. It should be very small. It's bounded by this property by the parameter called epsilon, which is actually a privacy loss parameter. So when one designs a differential private algorithm like in machine learning, they can be able to account for the privacy loss to say, with this algorithm, this is how much risk the people will be exposed to. So for that, we use that parameter epsilon. Next slide, please. So particularly, this is how it looks like. We have two data sets that differ by at most one entry, meaning one data set has person N or person any person, while the other data set doesn't. So there's that difference of one individual. So the idea of the differential privacy is to apply a randomized algorithm in such a way that the output of both data sets will be almost similar. So when an adversary gets a response from either of the two, they will get an answer which is almost similar. That way, it wouldn't matter whether a person participated in the study or not, making it more appealing for people to participate because they know that their sensitive data will not be compromised. Next slide, please. So DP has different appealing properties like composition. You know that if we have one algorithm which is differentially private, we can use another mechanism or algorithm which is differentially private, and then from there we can compute the overall bounds or the overall privacy of the system. It also enables us what we call group privacy. If you could define an individual privacy, which is what we'll do in a moment. From that definition of the individual privacy, you can be able to account for privacy for k individuals in a group. So it enables that group privacy. It also enables that, it has that property of closure under post-processing, meaning it ensures that auxiliary information does not compromise the privacy of the subjects, meaning the information that will be leaked to the, previous slide, okay. Yeah, that information that will be leaked to the adversary will not cause any damage to the subjects or the participants in the data set. So that way, any information that the adversary might have will not help in any way in gaining some private information from individuals. But next slide, please. So the reason for using DP in most applications is because it has some of the benefits, including this robustness against privacy attacks. Earlier, I talked a bit about data anonymization, like K-anonymity, and I didn't go into details. But the problem with such approaches is that once somebody has auxiliary information, it's possible for them to actually gain more information from the systems. There were privacy attacks that were demonstrated that with this information, it's possible to compromise these anonymization systems. But with DP, there's that robustness against privacy attacks because, like I said earlier, even if an adversary has auxiliary information, they cannot use that information to compromise the security. And because of this privacy loss parameter called epsilon, we can be able to quantify the risk, the privacy risk. That way it enables transparency, because we'll know that we are implementing this system and there's this much risk associated with implementing that algorithm. Next slide, please. So this is just the definition of differential privacy. So if we have a randomized function or algorithm K, we say it's epsilon differentially private or pure differentially private if for those data sets that I mentioned earlier, dataset D1 and D2, which differ by at most one element. For instance, in that example, we saw one had 3 elements, that I had 2. So if you have this, okay, I can have it. Let me just continue. So we have these 2 data sets, D1 and D2. They differ by at most one element. So we say that algorithm or function is differentially private. It's differentially private if the ratio of the 2, if you apply this mechanism on one data set and another data set, they are bounded by e to power epsilon, where epsilon normally is taken to be very small. So that's the definition of differential privacy. This is what we call pure differential privacy. So any algorithm or any mechanism that meets this definition is differentially private. Next slide, please. Okay, this is how it looks like more like a demonstration of what it is like in real life. So what do you call this pure differential privacy or epsilon differential privacy? We have our input data in one D, which is D1 in this case, and another database has D2, which does not have an element X. And then we perform analysis on that. And we're saying the output of both should be almost similar. They should be bounded by epsilon to power, sorry, e to power epsilon. So that's basically what it means, that the output that we get should be almost similar. Next slide, please. So there are different algorithms that are associated with this epsilon differential privacy or pure differential privacy. One of which is the old algorithm. Actually, this one predates the definition of DP, because the definition of differential privacy or the proposal of DP came around, I think it was in 2006. But there was this old algorithm which actually, when it was evaluated, it was realized that actually it meets the definition of differential privacy as an algorithm. It's called randomized response. It's normally used in social sciences, where the idea is that for surveys that involve the sharing of private data, instead of just waiting for correct answer from the respondents, we use this randomized response where at times we toss the coin, the respondents will toss the coin. For instance, if it's hit, they answer truthfully. If it's tail, then they toss it again. So if the question was demanded either yes or no, they toss it for the second time. If it's head, they can say it's yes. If it's tail, then it's no. So that level of randomness, so that randomness response was observed that actually, even though it predates differential privacy, it actually meets that definition that we provided earlier of differential privacy. Another mechanism or algorithm that meets this definition is what we call Laplace mechanism, which is actually, I think the original paper came up with this definition, the Laplace definition. The idea is to take your input data and then you apply the Laplace noise, which is actually the distribution, probability distribution that meets that Laplace distribution, probability distribution. So the output that we get from that will be differentially private using this Laplace mechanism. The other one is exponential mechanism, where we also apply exponential noise to our input data to turn it into a differentially private system. Next slide, please. So DP as it is very restrictive in terms of what is allowed, because it doesn't allow any probability of failure. So in order to allow the probability of failure in the algorithm, we have another definition of differential privacy called epsilon delta differential privacy, or an approximate differential privacy. So this privacy allows a room for an error, which is characterized by the parameter delta, where delta is cryptographically small. So in a way, it relaxes this pure differential privacy because it enables that possibility of an error with probability 1 minus delta, where delta is very small. Or next slide, please. So this is the definition, which is similar to the pure differential privacy, but with a new component or the new parameter delta, which I've just talked about in a moment. So it allows that failure with probability 1 minus delta, where delta is very, very small. Next slide, please. So for this approximate differential privacy, because it relaxes that requirement of having no error, it's normally used in most applications, including in machine learning. So there are different mechanisms. So in this case, when I talk about mechanism, it's the same as talking about an algorithm. So one of the mechanisms is what we call Gaussian mechanism. In this case, we take our input data and then we add Gaussian noise distributed through Gaussian probability distribution. We also have what we call Renyi mechanism, which uses Renyi divergence. I'll talk about that in a moment. And then we have zero concentrated differential privacy. And the last one, we have DP, or differentially private stochastic gradient descent mechanism. With SDG, we know how SGD works, which is the stochastic gradient descent within our artificial neural networks. So in this case, we can apply differential privacy in that algorithm in order to make our ML system more satisfy the differential privacy definition. Or next slide, please. So this Renyi differential privacy, which is an example of approximate DP, meaning it meets that definition. It was proposed around 2017, and like I said earlier, it uses this concept of Renyi divergence. Or next slide, please. So for those who might be interested in implementing Renyi differential privacy, it's supported in two of the key libraries of machine learning, namely in TensorFlow and PyTorch. So if one wants to work within PyTorch, it's possible to use DP, so Renyi DP within PyTorch, and then also within TensorFlow. Next slide, please. So this is what we mean by RDP, or Renyi differential privacy. We have two probability distributions from, like we saw earlier, from D1 and D2, and then we apply a mechanism, randomized algorithm on both of them. And then the idea of this is to measure the distance using Renyi divergence. So basically what it does is to bound the probability distributions of two algorithms, but in this case, instead of using e to power epsilon, actually using the Renyi divergence as a bound. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the definition of Renyi divergence for some who might not be familiar with this. So you have two probability distributions, P and Q. In this case, they'll be corresponding to P, for instance, will be corresponding to an algorithm applied on database D1, and then Q, for instance, corresponding to an algorithm being applied on D2. So the Renyi differential privacy is given by this 1 over alpha minus 1 log 2. So this is basically what Renyi differential privacy is how it's defined with this vector epsilon. Next slide, please. So for a Renyi differential privacy, we just mean that the divergence of the function that acts on D and the one that acts on D2, for instance, are bounded by this epsilon. So in this case, we're looking at the Renyi differential divergences of both probability distributions for both functions FD and FD1, with FD acting on database D and FD1 acting on database D1. So on this are bounded by this epsilon. We can see from our original definition of differential privacy, if we take the log on both sides, because we bounded by e to power epsilon. So if we take the logs on both sides, we'll still end up with bounding by epsilon. But in that case, it will be log of FD1 and log of FD2, for instance. Next slide, please. So another algorithm or mechanism that is used in machine learning, which is differentially private, is what we call DPSGD, or differentially private stochastic gradient descent. I'll talk about that algorithm in a moment. But basically, the idea was that when it was proposed in 2016, it was to ensure that we can enable DP within that process of optimization, which is the stochastic gradient descent. So DP is applied in that algorithm of the stochastic gradient descent. Next slide, please. So first, we know how SGD works. So in this case, we are going to compute the gradient, and then we clip the L2 norm. These are just the steps that have been followed. And then we compute the average, and then we add the Gaussian noise. So addition of Gaussian noise means that our algorithm meets the definition of approximate differential privacy. So after adding the noise to our input, then we perform gradient descent. So in this case, we're not just performing gradient descent on our original data points. We clip that first L2 norm first of the gradient, and then compute the average. And then from there, we add noise. So in this case, we are making it differentially private. And finally, after making it differentially private, then we can perform gradient descent for optimization of the algorithm. Next slide, please. So I think this is what I've just said, but this is how it was presented in that paper, the 2016 paper that actually introduced differential private stochastic gradient descent. So next slide, please. Then we have the last one, which is what we call page. It's mainly about diverging by different teachers. And this one is relatively new because it was proposed in 2017. So unlike DPSGD, which actually focuses on applying differential privacy within the optimization algorithm, in this case, stochastic gradient descent, with page we apply, we guarantee privacy within our training data, meaning we apply this from our training data end, not within the algorithm. Next slide, please. So this page is just teacher examples. We just average different teacher examples and then a student. That's basically what it works. It's a private average of teacher ensembles. I'm almost done. Next slide, please. So the way it works, this page, like I said, it's a private averaging of teacher ensembles. These teacher ensembles are used. We know the ensembles from ensemble models. I think we are familiar from machine learning with some of the models that use ensembles like random forest and the rest. So in this case, we have teacher ensembles that are used to generate noisy labels using voting and differential privacy. So we have our original data, and then we're trying to generate noisy output, like it's more like in classification application. So these teachers will just generate noisy labels, and then because they're ensembles, they'll just use voting to come up with the label, the noisy label. Then the student uses the training data and the DP labels generated by the, by these teacher ensembles. So in this case, the teachers will be using the Laplace noise. So what it basically means, we have our original data, but for the labels, the corresponding labels, the teachers will create these noisy labels using Laplace noise. So that way, we have information, for instance, private data, but the student will not have access to the original labels because they'll train the model only using the non-private labels, which actually only using the private labels which are trained using teacher ensembles. So that way there's no correspondence between our features and the labels. Next slide, please. Okay, this is mainly the demonstration how it works and the kind of information that is available to the student, and then how the teachers create everything, and then to create those noisy labels, and then the student will use input data plus training labels to train the model, the AI model. Next slide, please. I think that's the end. We have covered the following, which is what was in the introduction: a bit of machine learning, data privacy, and PhDs focusing more on differential privacy. Thank you very much for your attention. And next slide. And apologies again for the inconvenience.
All right, thank you so much, Makamisa.
Thank you. I'm not sure if there are some questions.
Sorry, Makamisa, can you say that again?
No, I was just asking if there are some questions.
Oh, anyone with questions or comments about what he presented? Yes, please come up.
Can you go to slide 11?
Okay, slide 11. Just come because he won't be able to hear. Okay, someone has a question on slide 11. This one? This one?
No, I think it's red.
Okay, just come up.
Hello, Dr. Makamisa.
Hello, how are you?
Sorry, I just wanted to further understand this whole diagram of yours. Can you just simply explain it?
Okay, thank you.
In layman terms.
Okay. Thank you very much. On top, like the top part of the picture with the data custodian, we have our original data with all PIIs, meaning personal identifiable information. For instance, we have original data set with names and all zip codes, age and everything that might be private. So we apply anonymization. And then after applying an anonymization, the data that will be received by individuals will be an anonymized data set, which is the diagram at the bottom. So we start with original data, we apply anonymization, and then we end up with anonymized data that could be accessible to data recipients. Does it make sense?
So
now?
how does that process?
Sorry?
How does that process work? Like, say for example, you put in your ID information. What does it do that it actually just come out as none?
Okay, maybe in the next slide. Sorry. Yeah. These are different techniques.
Yes, yeah.
That's like for anonymization, we can apply different techniques. Like one of them could be pseudonymization, where we just, for names, we just, instead of using names which are PII, we just use IDs, for instance, or any random figure. At the end of the day, you still have relevant features within a data set or relevant records, but without that field that is sensitive. So meaning you just apply a pseudonym for the sensitive fields. That could be one of the examples. Others could be like substitution, you just substitute values. Others, depending on how important they are, you just keep them out. You don't use anything. For instance, you just use a star. So these are different techniques that can be used for anonymization.
Okay. All right, thank you. Another question is, why does DP allow the leak? Why do we have the leak in?
I think the idea was taken mainly from cybersecurity, because even when you build cybersecurity systems, you cannot have systems that are like 100% secure. You still have that minimal risk of maybe compromise of your system. You normally bound it using epsilon. So they just actually brought some of the ideas from cryptography into data privacy. So that loss is actually, the risk is there, but it's very insignificant. Meaning the amount of data that will be leaked to the adversary will not cause any damage to the individual.
Okay. So is this what we would call maybe an uncertainty error or something like that?
Maybe because it's just sort of a randomized. But the idea is, like with cryptography, the idea is to build systems where you're saying, because you cannot have what we call perfect privacy, you just have to allow that minimal loss, because perfect privacy, like perfect security, they are mathematically impossible. So that's why you're saying you can just allow this minimal leakage.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Makamisa, for the insightful talk on differential privacy. Can we clap hands for him, please? Yeah, thank you. Okay, so our next speaker was supposed to start now, but I don't think he joined yet. So we'll probably break for a tea break, and then for about maybe 15 minutes, and then we come back. Okay? I hope tea is ready.
So for your tea break, so that at least we don't find ourselves lost, we have to go as if we are going to the exit there. That's where the tea break corner is set up. Yep. Let's make it about 15 minutes. Make it short. Not precisely.
Yes. Don't you have a cha-cha?
For Andrea.
You're on.